Welcome back to part 2 of my chat with recently retired Detective Inspector Jon Rouse. In part 1, we learnt how Jon came to join the Queensland Police Force after being a victim of a bank robbery, and once in the police, how he became a detective and then found a passion for investigating child abuse. Jon, welcome back. The I Catch Killers podcast was a fresh start for me, as I left policing behind and started a new life. Over the years, we've laughed together, cried, and shared some powerful moments. Welcome to I Catch Killers.
Thanks, Gary.
Jon, I'm going to embarrass you up front because the way that you come across in your career, and you know that the stuff that you do is very much part of a team, as you made a point in part 1. But you've got some pretty impressive awards and acknowledgements. Queensland Australian of the Year, Queenslander Australian of the Year 2019.
Yeah.
I look at you, you're playing it down. I'm embarrassing you now. Also, in 2018, New York International Centre for Missing and Exploited Children awarded the Champion for Children Award in 2018. I make light of it, but all jokes aside, that's recognition for a career where you've actually made a difference.
Look, I hear what you're saying, but nothing happens in isolation. I was very, very fortunate during my career. If I did one thing right in my career, it was that I managed to, whether through good luck, I met the right people and brought them together. If there's one thing I can do, I do that. I can form networks and I can find the right people and I can bring them together. And ultimately, we formed an amazing team. So it always sat and continues to sit very uncomfortably with me that they're not recognized for the shouldering a shitload of work. And you're standing there being recognized for it and they're not. And so I will always deflect to the fact that any of those awards, and even the Queensland Australian, that's on the back of blood, sweat, and tears from men and women in the Queensland Police.
No, I mentioned it, and when I said I'm going to embarrass you, I knew your response would be along what you just said. But I think it is recognition of the people that helped you as well, and the people that you worked with. It's very much. Yeah. And quite often in criminal investigations, there's got to be a person that, the go-to person or the one that's identified. But as you and I both know, any success in a major crime investigation or criminal investigation is very much a team effort, not just from the detectives, it's a whole range of people. So
yeah, absolutely. Nothing happens just because of one person. It's it's a team. It's a huge team effort.
Let's talk about the establishing a victim identification database, because out of all things it's done, I think this is something that's really very much changed the landscape. Do you want to talk us through the process and what that's all about?
Yeah, look, so victim identification has probably been at the heart of just about everything that I did from around about. So I'll tell you how it came about. 2004, we nationally did what was and still is, despite what you'll hear in the media sometimes, the biggest nationally coordinated operation on child sex offenders. It was a response to a US-led operation called Falcon. We were sent over between 700 and 800, I can't remember the exact number of leads, but about 700 to 800 leads came to the Australian High-Tech Crime Centre. Reps from each state and territory. I went from Queensland, went to Canberra, planned an operation on how to deal with this.
Jon, could you just break it down where you say leads that were sent, 700 to 800 leads sent across? Yep.
So every single one of those individual pieces of evidence against 700 to 800 Australians, they had all used their credit cards to purchase access to child abuse websites and download content. Okay. So they'd all committed. A laydown was there, walk up, start criminal offence.
Yep.
Quite actionable. But you have to remember at the time that the capabilities and coordination and understanding in Australia was very diverse and disparate. You had us at Argos that have been doing it for quite a few years. We'd had our processes in place, our search warrants in place. We were even doing in-field triage of electronic devices back in 2003 and 2004. Most of the other states weren't doing that. They'd seize the device into an evidence locker until forensics could look at it 6 months later.
Yeah.
That's unacceptable when a child is sitting on that device. So we, through our forensics team, Peter Kingsley, developed a piece of kit that was able to field triage way back then. Anyway, I segue, but so those leads came into the country. We did a coordinated operation. Nationally was known Operation Auxin, AUXIN. Each state and territory was responsible for how it actioned its targets. We had 127 in Queensland. We made about 80 arrests. We did 127 targets in 6 days across the state. Some interesting statistics. That was the game changer for Australia. That brought the Commonwealth into it. It brought the Australian Federal Police into the crime type. It changed legislation across the country. It opened up the eyes to the Australian population that they live amongst us, but they live amongst us in big numbers. So, but the interesting stats that came out of that and changed me again. It was one of those moments again where I realized, you know what, this is being touted as a huge success. It was a bloody abysmal failure in my view, and I said it soon after. So Bob Atkinson, who was our commissioner at the time, asked me to speak at all the commissioners get together.
Yep.
So there was an Oceania meeting of the commissioners of police in Brisbane. He asked me if I could speak about Argos at it, and I said, I'm happy to, boss, but would you mind if I can make 2 submissions that I'll be seeking support from the commissioners for? So I gave them a quick background on the operation, and I demonstrated to them that across Australia, with all of the arrests that were made of these people that had purchased access to child abuse websites, the only state that found contact offence material, like images and videos of children that were abused by the offender, was Queensland. Right. We rescued 8 children that had been abused. So we didn't just walk in on the evidence from the United States, make an arrest, chuck it into a forensic queue and walk away. We actually looked at the content for actual harm by the offender.
Very significant.
That is an abysmal failure by any standard. So the challenge, and you'll probably end up having to cut this, but I want you to try to understand what the premise for that database is.
Break it down.
Okay. Every time our police make an arrest and they triage a case, whether it's a phone now or a hard drive, iPad, and there's content on it, sometimes that content is significant. I remember dealing with cases of close to 1 million images.
Yeah.
1 million images. Think about that. So then think about your poor detective who's got to go through that content looking for victims.
Yep.
Or even understanding whether any of that is possibly being produced by this person that I've got in custody out in the back room. It's not physically possible to do it. It would take months, years, and even then you won't get it right. So the premise in understanding that was a problem for police, and they would just look at the content, go, that's child abuse material, you're under arrest, next case. I recognize that there's technology that can help eliminate content that we've seen before.
Yep.
Now, if we can do that, because I can tell you now that we still continue to see images from the series that Geoffrey Robert Dobbs produced back in 1999, 2000, right? They still circle the globe.
Yeah.
Okay. But we could remove those in the triage process. So all we need to do is get our investigators to start creating this database. The database has got all of the content that we know, that we've seen again and again and again, and it's categorized as previously seen. I'm simplifying.
And again, what we're breaking it down, but we're talking about images of children being abused, and it literally was detectives going through and looking at it picture by picture, image by image. And what you're saying is that where those images have already been circulated, we've dealt with those images, they can be taken out. So narrow down the ones that we need to focus on. Is that the fair assessment of what you're saying?
Exactly. So each image and video has got what you could call a fingerprint that's unique to it.
Yep.
Okay. Um, I mean, if you crop the image or you change the scale, hue, or anything like that, it changes this fingerprint. But predominantly that never happens. So what our forensics people can do is that when they're processing the case for forensics, they can utilize the fingerprint database to eliminate all of the previously seen material.
Right.
That leaves the investigator then with a significantly reduced volume of content to look at. And they also know this hasn't been seen before. So they can then really start putting their investigator hat on and going, okay, well, this isn't on the database. It's highly likely that this person has produced it or is in touch with somebody who's producing it.
Yep.
So becoming a detective and doing the investigation rather than this sausage factory approach to investigating these cases. That was the premise for ANVIL, the Australian National Victim Image Library. So I spoke to the commissioners about those failures and that there's technology that could help us do the job better. So they endorsed that. That's now called, it's now sitting, the database was migrated with the Argos database, and it's now sitting in at the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation in Fortitude Valley in Queensland. And that's used, that fingerprint database is sent out nationally to our forensics teams. Yep. But our men and women across the country continue to have to look at content. Okay, they still have to do that. So that was submission number one. Submission number two was that because we brought the country together to do this Operation Auxon, can we try to keep together so that we can all stay on the same page?
Yeah, makes sense.
And keep our capabilities together. So the commissioners endorsed the formation of that group that then became the ANSPA Child Protection Committee, and now it's Operation Griffin. It's the national heads of sex crimes teams getting together to make sure that we're trying to keep abreast of what's going on. So anyway, back to the victim ID thing. In 2000, so I came to know a guy called Paul Griffiths from the United Kingdom. He sent a lead across to Australia in 2003 of a very young girl who was being sexually abused. It's still horrendous. It's one of those ones where you just, I'll never forget it.
Stays with you.
Just, I mean, her voice is the screaming and things like that. But anyway, he sent that across from the UK. You know, act local, think global. He's gone, this is clearly Australian. Let's get it across to Australia. So we solved that case in Queensland. We arrested the offender and the child was removed from harm. But that forged a bond with Paul and I. And ultimately, Paul's an amazing individual. If you haven't seen Children in the Pictures, the documentary on SBS, he's in that. I highly recommend that you do look at it. It shows you some of the people that we've got to work with over the years.
Children in the Pictures on SBS.
Children in the Pictures, yeah. Okay. It's live streaming it's on SBS on demand.
Yeah.
It goes for about an hour and 10 minutes, and it really gives you a bit. You won't see anything bad, but it will give you an understanding of what I'm talking about and some of the people that we've worked with. So, Paul's recognised globally. He was the chair of the Interpol Specialist Group on Crimes Against Children, photographic memory, irrefutably the world's leading victim identification expert. What VID experts do is all they focus on is those images and videos, and their job is to find them and send the lead to an agency to try to remove them from harm. That's all they do.
Yeah.
So Paul came across from the UK. He joined us at Argos and was the first victim identification expert in the country. We've now got 3 in that team at Argos. Interestingly, 1 from the UK, 1 from the US, and 1 from France, which is once again great in terms of global networking.
Yeah.
Because most of the content that they're seeing isn't from Australia. It's, from South America or Mexico or the United States or Norway or, so the network is formidable. But there's not many of them.
And because invariably when a lead comes to you, it might be images on a link to a computer, or a computer sees, you've gone through that. These are the type of things that detectives are confronted with. Like, okay, the starting point is, a child's been sexually abused because there's the image. But how do you track who that child is and who the offender is? This is what you're trying to overcome with the victim identification?
Correct. And it's also a training issue for law enforcement in Australia, and it continues to be, to understand that whatever it is that's led you to that door with your search warrant,
yep,
it's opening the door into that person's life. And if you for 1 minute do not treat that person as a threat to the community and as a person that is committing hands-on abuse, you're failing from the moment you go through the door. Now, the only way you're going to prove or disprove that is by looking at the content of their communications and what's on their hard drives or phones.
Yeah.
And once you look at that content, and this is where the database comes into play, forensics needs to triage it to get rid of what we've already solved. And you, detective, then need to try to find the children in those pictures. And you've got VID teams around the country now. Every state and territory has got one.
Yep.
Tassie and NT is not permanent, but they've got access. They're there to help you. But don't just treat it as another kiddie porn investigation and move on to the next one. Focus on why you're there in the first place.
How do you feel, talk from a personal point of view, when you do see an investigation where it does lead to the victim identified, you're taking the victim away from horrific circumstances? How does it feel personally from that? Because I would imagine from a professional point of view, yep, you're doing your job, but it has to have an impact on you emotionally and personally.
And there's been a lot. There's been a lot over the years. And, so there's a couple of things that I did very early in the piece, and that is that as soon as the removal from harm situations happen, I move on. I don't think about it again.
Yep.
Next case. Certainly you're happy that you've done your job, and you congratulate the team wherever they are that's made the effort to find the child and remove them from harm, but then it's next case. I know police that have become very engaged with the particular victims that they've removed from harm, and it's you're dealing with psychological warfare within yourself every single day that you're doing this work. You do not want to get attached to these children that you've helped at all. Sometimes and the Children in the Pictures documentary kind of plays this out a little bit. There was one little girl that we spent so much time trying to remove from harm. We were constantly seeing content of her posted into this group. And when we closed, I had to make a decision to close the operation. We still hadn't found her, but the only source of the content was from within this network. And that was just bloody devastating. She was sexually abused for another 4 months. It took 4 months from the work that we did for the FBI finally to locate the address and remove her from harm. And we know that she was raped the night before the FBI went through the door. Moments like that are bittersweet.
Yeah. It's tough. You have implemented that when you got to the situation where you were leading teams to encourage the your detectives or your team to move on to the next case and not hold on to it. And you have put that down to why you survived so long in the area that you worked.
It is definitely part of the toolkit for survival in working in this crime type. Yeah.
Yeah. Because out of across the board, I think child protection, that's people got rotated out of it. In New South Wales, we had policies where they'd rotate them out because you can't stay in there too long because it's going to damage you. It's a difficult area of law enforcement.
Well, it's an interesting policy decision too, Gary. So I know in some jurisdictions we don't have that policy in Queensland Police at Argos. Okay, we do not mandatorily rotate anybody. It can actually be quite detrimental to their health to do that. So you put policies and practices in place to support your people and make sure that they know that they can leave.
Yeah.
I think it was after 3 years, we had a policy in place where we would park you for 3 months in anywhere in law enforcement you wanted to go work there for 3 months. Your chair is here if you want to come back. But smell the roses for a minute and have a break. But where does in New South Wales, for example, if it's a 3-year rotation, where'd they get 3 years from?
John,
where's that magical number come from? Because I know people who've walked in and lasted 5 minutes. So you're mandating that they'll do 3 years?
I know there's problems there. I like what you said then about the rotation, because I've been pushing this for a long time, and this is winding it back. 20 years ago, where the Royal Commission came through, there was corruption, and the policy came through that you're going to be rotated. I was homicide. Homicide was my passion. That's the area that I specialised in. And they brought in a rotation policy, and It was basically if you'd been there 5 years, I think it was, you got rotated out, which I personally didn't have a problem with, in that rotate me out, put me somewhere for a short period of time, but I'm a homicide detective with the view of coming back at some point. And they
Yeah.
didn't do that. And I found that caused, I'm talking about myself individually, more stress than actually working the homicide. And I saw a lot of people stressed about it. They've dedicated their life to a particular area of expertise, and it's going to be taken away from them for no particular reason.
Biro pilots that have never faced an angry man in their career making decisions that affect good people who are trying to make a difference.
Yeah.
And you know what? If you're looking after yourself, Gary,
Yep.
and you've got a team that's looking after you and monitoring your well-being, I can't control what happens at home with your family or your finances
Exactly.
or any of that kind of stuff. But in the office, I can keep an eye on you and make sure that you're okay. And my door's open. Come and talk to me if you've got a problem. And that was the policy that we had.
Yeah.
Was looking after our people. But look at the loss of skill and investigative knowledge that you have.
Oh,
it
by
takes
rotating.
years.
Yeah.
Years.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And on the whim of a biro pilot.
Yeah, I haven't heard that term, but I like that, biro pilot. But
There's
you're 100% right, and and it's not just whether it's child protection, homicide. It could be in fraud. It could be the robbery squad. There's all this expertise, or drug squad, and when it gets rotated out, we started off the podcast talking about going to work and learning something each day, and you can't lose that expertise. I'm interested the reach that you guys have had, not just within Australia, and you talked about when the commissioners came together, but you're networking with international law enforcement networks. Do you want to talk us through some of the experiences from there?
Yeah, look, that really started on the back of a couple of things that we've already talked about. So Paul Griffiths, the chair of the Interpol Specialist Group, that case he sent across to Australia. The Geoffrey Robert Dobbs case, which was known as the FEC series globally. The whole world was looking for Geoffrey Robert Dobbs. We'd already arrested him. We didn't know the rest of the world was looking for Geoffrey Robert Dobbs. They were still trying to find these children, and we'd already arrested him.
Could you tell us who Geoffrey Robert Dobbs is for people that don't know?
Yeah, so Geoffrey Robert Dobbs, I would argue, is still one of the most significant and proliferous child sex offenders ever identified in Australia. He offended in Melbourne and in Queensland. In Victoria and Queensland. He was a Telstra worker, but he also positioned himself, as child sex offenders do, into positions where they have access to kids. So he was a youth care worker. He put himself out as a gymnastics coach, so parents would drop in their kids off with him after school. And what he would do is sexually abuse them, but film it. So he had a hidden camera and he filmed it. And that content got onto the internet, into child sex offender networks. He came undone because he had the content on a video cassette. The cassette jammed. He took the jammed cassette player to a tech repairman who repaired it, cleared the tape, wound it on, put it back in to make sure that it was playing, and was confronted with child abuse material on the screen, and it was reported. We identified, I think, nearly 70 of his victims, but there was upward of 200 that he abused. But the interesting thing, like I said about him, is that content that he produced in the late 90s into early 2000 was on the internet. It was in child sex offender networks. It was in the Wonderland Club, which is a very notorious child sex offender network that was on IRC. And teams from across Europe and at Interpol were trying to find him.
Yeah.
And that's the key thing, that our investigators need to understand, that you may have removed that child from harm and stopped the abuse. And if you don't look at that content and understand that it's probably distributed and police in another country are looking for it, you really need to understand the importance of making sure that that material goes to your VID teams and it gets across to the CAC team in Lyon.
Crucial, isn't it?
It really is. All of those things came together, and I was asked to speak at the Interpol Specialist Group in Lyon in 2005, which was a pretty daunting gig.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
For me, I got to say. In fact, I'll segue with a little known story. I was like going, how the hell am I going to I mean, how am I going to break the ice with these people? And I thought a really good way to do that would be to get somebody to introduce me, right? So I was fortunate to know Steve Irwin,
Oh,
and
okay, that's got their attention. Yep.
yeah, and I reached out to his manager, and Steve Irwin put together a clip. I've still got it, and that played up on the big screen in the Interpol specialist group room. And I was kind of like, God, these guys even going to know who he is? I didn't know how it was going to go. Anyway, so Steve is on the screen. G'day, I'm Steve Irwin. You may know me, the crocodile hunter, all of this kind of stuff. I hunt predators, big apex predators, not like the predators you hunt. So, and he did a big thank you on behalf of parents everywhere and all
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And then he just wrapped up with, now, a great mate of mine, John, from the Queensland Police Service. Well, that was it. And then into the presentation.
Okay, it was a good ploy.
It was, look, it was funny. It was good. It took the chill into the room. And
Yeah.
so that was the beginning of me networking. I met pretty much the key reps, long-term experts from the BKA in Germany, Norway, Europol, Interpol, they were all there. And that brought me into a community that taught me a lot. It taught me about victim identification, the importance of sharing our solved cases. I learned so much from that group, and I finished up with the group actually this year. Last year.
Yeah.
I went to my last meeting in March. I was the chair of the undercover group at Interpol when I retired. So I went to that meeting for 18 years, barring COVID and a couple of other things, but.
Do you think on a world scale, people, all the different jurisdictions, they're appreciating, have an appreciation of the impact of child abuse, and we are all lifting our game?
The investigators in this particular community are very cohesive. I don't think it's like any other crime type in terms of cooperation. And people are in it for a long time, Gary. Like, I mean, I still have friends. Like a German federal agent that I met in 2005 is still my buddy, and he's still working in this crime type for the BKA.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're enduring long-term friendships. It's not like any other crime type in the world.
Well, you're sharing a common bond because of the nature of the work and the pressure of the work too. And I don't think people perhaps don't appreciate the pressure comes from the fact that if you don't stop this abuse, the child is going to continue to be abused, or other children will be abused. So that must play on your mind when you're working on these cases.
Oh, it's really difficult. It's really very hard for our victim ID teams. I mean, they consistently are seeing new content being produced from the same offender. So they know they are the line between stopping that abuse or not.
Yeah.
And it's very hard work. So going back to that documentary again, Adele Desir from France, she's one of the best in the world from Argos in VID. She features in it, and it really gives you some insight into her.
Yeah.
And a bit of Paul, Warren Bulmer from Canada, and Scott Anderson. They're all in. So if you want to understand a little bit more about the people, they did it quite well.
Yeah.
In terms of portraying who they are.
It's the type of work it does. You've got to have that passion. I can't imagine that how hard it would be to, it's 5 o'clock, I'm meant to knock off now. If you're on a case that you think, well, if I just gave it another hour or two here, I might be able to prevent this child being sexually abused.
As soon as I started into that network, 8 to 4, 2 to 10, 4 to 12 ended. I was taking leads at 4 a.m. in the morning. I was talking to the East Coast of the United States when I came into work, and then I was dealing with Europe when I finished work, and it just became a blur over the next 20 odd years of working in global timeframes because
that's
information they need, and but that forged incredible friendships and bonds. It really did.
And I think when we talk about policing, what you get out of policing, and the way you described your career there, I got to the point where I'd never sat there and looked at the clock and, oh, when am I going to knock off? Some of the days I didn't know, am I meant to be working or not working? You just turn up because it's passionate. But that's not a bad way to live your life either. Like if you're doing something that you enjoy and you're earning a living from it, it can be a healthy way and a good, rewarding way of living your life.
Gary, I feel very sorry for people who've got a job where they do count the clock and can't wait to go home and dread Monday. I never did that. I never dreaded it.
Yeah.
I was out of bed at 4, into headquarters, rode the bike, went to the gym, hit the shower on the floor. It just never occurred to me that this was a job. I just didn't think of it that way.
Yeah, yeah. No, I understand where you're coming from, and I fully relate to it. And I say it to encourage people if they want a rewarding career. These are the type of things that you can find. Since you've left the police and you've only left it recently, but you've kept your hand in things. You're still doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah, look, I wasn't ready to tow the caravan around Australia, Gary. I'm just not that guy. Going fishing and I think that the novelty of that would wear off pretty quick. So when I knew that I was being forced to retire,
John, I just interrupt there. I like the fact that you own yourself. Okay. Well, I'm not ready for the golf course or towing the caravan around. Yeah,
it's actually all I've got it in my brain. I had to, as part of one of the roles I'm doing at the moment, we had a symposium not too long ago, and the symposium was held at a local golf club at a suburb here in Queensland. And there's all the old fellas at 10 a.m. They've done their 18 holes and they're on the beer. And I was like, one day maybe, but not yet.
Just not ready for it.
Not yet. Yeah. Not yet. So yeah, look, with retirement looming, I didn't know that I had a viable career after law enforcement, but my wife, she's ex-Swedish National Police. She worked at Interpol in the Crimes Against Children team. She led the team in Bangkok for Interpol. She and I decided that we both want to keep working together, so we thought we'd just form a little consultancy that would help from the periphery.
Yeah,
do what we can with training or helping tech companies. So we started that, and at the same time, some colleagues from Monash University asked if I would like to join them at the Artificial Intelligence Labs. It's called ALEX.
Yep.
So I started working with ALEX at Monash Uni in January as a professor. So I've been with them now for over a year. So I started doing that. I joined the board of directors for the Daniel Morecombe Foundation. I joined the board of directors for the International Centre for Missing Children in Australia. Yep. I was starting to keep myself nice and busy, still in the fight, but just in a different way. And September last year, I was asked if I could take up the interim victims commissioner role for Queensland. So I'm currently in that role until June 30 this year.
You talk us through that role? I find that interesting. What's the role involved and the work that you do?
In a nutshell, that role is to represent the interests of victims of crime.
Yep.
And their journey through the justice system.
Yeah.
So that's set at a very high level. My role at the moment is very much setting up the office for whoever will be the incumbent commissioner when they advertise it and they apply for it, and building the team and setting up the structures, policies, processes, and delivering on some pretty key things that have come out of commissions of inquiry that have been identified by victims of crime as problematic.
And this is to improve practices, not just to take complaints from victims that.
Certainly taking information from members of right now, the position has not got a statutory authority, but it will once the legislation is enacted. So right now, there's no power associated with the role, but there will be, and it will have a complaint functionality. But that's not to say I'm not listening to the complaints of victims of crime and listening to their story, so I can find out where there's systemic issues that need to be fixed. And there's lots of systemic issues in the justice system that need to be fixed.
What type of things? Can you give us examples of sort of things that are presenting themselves?
Really, really simple ones is like that they had a horrendous crime committed against them, right? But once they're pulled into the justice system, they just become part of that, like a statement and a witness.
Mm.
And in many cases, particularly with like a lot of the things I'm hearing at the moment with youth crime in Queensland, is that they're not getting any justice out of the system at all for what's happened to them. Their car's been stolen, their house has been broken into, they've had property theft. They're not kept abreast of what's happening. They're not told about what happens with the court case. Lots of complaints about people not being told when a serious and violent criminal is released back into the community. They're not advised. All of those things are being drawn together by the team I'm working with at the Office of the Victims Commissioner. And where we're seeing systemic issues, we'll be making recommendations for change on those. So I'm in that role till, like I said, handovers begins in July. And then I'll be doing something else.
Not at the golf course or towing the caravan at this stage.
Not yet. Look, I'm very lucky to not have had any significant health issues. I think I've still got most of my faculties. While I'm blessed to have those things, then I'm not ready to stop trying to make a difference.
Was it your wife being involved in the same line of work? Was that an advantage or a disadvantage, do you think? Could you?
Huge advantage.
Yeah. Understood what you're going through. Understood the pressures.
Totally. And look, I can actually have open, honest, detailed conversations about what I'm dealing with. Whereas in my previous relationships, you know what it's like, Gary. You come home, and most cops go through this. I actually just come home and I want to be left alone.
Yeah, fully understand.
I would come home and I just need silence or something on the TV that is just noise that I just detune from. And that doesn't work really well in most loving relationships where, hi, honey, how was your day? I actually can't tell you about my day.
Yeah.
So, I would say it's very advantageous,
As someone that can understand that you might have just had one of those days where you need to just have some quiet time and time to yourself. It's funny, isn't it, going from the high tempo or the pressure of and the horrendous nature of the work that you were looking at, going from that then stepping into a family environment or a family, friendship, whatever, happy environment, and your head's still back in the dark space you've just come from.
Yeah, look, it really is. And look, COVID presented lots of challenges for law enforcement everywhere, but this work from home policy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. My home is where I go to get away from that. I do not want to be working from home. And with most of the stuff I was doing, I was at the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation when COVID hit. I couldn't work from home. I couldn't do my job from home. You're dealing with content that I'm not even going to look at from home.
Yeah.
So, so we largely didn't stand down during COVID, but most of the office did. They were working. And obviously there's legacy issues related to that.
I always thought that I've managed to get through my career without the way that you described it, no major setbacks or illnesses. But I always said, because people ask, well, how did you last in homicide as long as you did, the pressure that comes there? And I said, well, if you've got a good team around you, that can take a lot of the pressure away. And if you're making hard decisions, even if you're the boss, but if you've got good people around you, it can it dilutes the pressure, I think, tenfold, having a good team.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's all about your team. It really is.
Yeah.
And good leadership above you as well.
Yeah.
Look, I've had I've had outstanding leaders, Bob Atkinson, Ross Barnett, Peter Crawford. They were and you know what they did? They had a policy of, John, I trust you to do your job until you prove otherwise. I'll never forget those lines from Ross Barnett.
How good is that? How good is that? That attitude, that makes a world of difference, that type of attitude.
Totally, it does. Yeah. Here's somebody who's actually got faith in me to chart a course and supportive. Not a micromanager, a biro pilot, a bureaucrat, somebody who actually gets it. And that transgresses across any form of employment, not just policing. It's So I was lucky to have some very good bosses, particularly in the formulative stages of where Argos was finding out what it was going to be. But equally, I've suffered under some very poor leadership as
Well,
well.
it's interesting you talk that type of boss, because I was thinking in the time I spent at homicide, I worked under I think 8 different bosses, and without naming names, some of the bosses that were inspiring were the ones that yeah gave you enough rope, you'd hang yourself if you're stupid enough, but they give you the respect that you could do the job, they'd understand and give you that latitude. And then you get the micromanagers that come in that just no respect for the fact that you've been doing a job for 20 years, you know what you're doing, and they want to change the world. And that creates that creates that problem. But yeah, leadership in policing, leadership anywhere, there's always going to be people saying, oh, that's a good leader, that's not. But I do understand what you're saying, and that's where I felt that not just myself, but my team and those around us in a squad would perform best when the boss gave respect to the experience the people had.
Yeah, absolutely. It's critical.
And
Um,
you want to do the right thing by the person. You wouldn't dare do the wrong thing
no,
because out of the respect that you have for that leader.
no, that's exactly right. It's just the principles of yeah. Leadership is a completely leadership and management, as we know, are two completely separate things,
Yeah,
completely different things. And I would much rather have a team that willingly want to be with me than a team that I'm forcing to come in and do things.
most definitely. The Daniel Morecombe Foundation, you're working with them. How did that connection come about?
Yeah, so I mean, I've known Bruce and Denise for a very, very long time. I was an ambassador for them. I started as an ambassador for them quite a long time ago. But obviously, the loss of Daniel, our team deployed. That was in December 2003. Our team just was sent to the North Coast to assist with the investigation through January and February, um, and I guess the short story about that is that there's lots of stories about my friendship with Bruce and Denise, but I remember coming into work one day early in his abduction, and the Morecambes, they're just one of those families that were never going to let this go. Like
Yeah,
they just amazing grit and determination. And one of the things they did for public awareness was get these little red wristbands, and they were for sale at the police cafeteria and headquarters. So I put one on, and that was in 2004. I think I put that on. It didn't leave my wrist until the killer was caught.
wow.
Those photographs, so they've now got it. It's at Daniel Morecombe House now,
Yeah,
in a frame. It was stapled at the end to try to hold it together, and it was a very faded white pink. But with it is a whole heap of photos where I've been in different places, and you can see that I'm wearing the wristband. It was a reminder every single day of what I was going to work to do, was to stop that ever happening to another family.
yeah,
The most horrendous thing happened to them,
yeah.
and it
What
took
they
so
went through.
long for justice. But to the once again, hats off to Bob Atkinson. He never gave up.
Yeah.
As the commissioner, he supported that investigation all the way through. It never stopped.
Yeah, well, it's one that's embedded in the psyche of the country. That one is such a horrific situation, but yeah, the Daniel's parents are just amazing, and I
Yeah,
always find that how people react or deal with trauma that you can't is unimaginable, and the way that they've gone about their business. Full credit to them.
yeah.
39 years in the police. What advice would you give to someone if they were thinking of joining the police?
Well, my first piece of advice would be do it. Like it's, I've never had a regret about the career path choice I took. It doesn't matter what you do in life. There's going to be ups and downs and peaks and troughs, and things don't go well or they do go well. But reflecting on my time, I've forged incredible, enduring, global, national friendships. You get a chance to, I guess it's going to attract a certain kind of person because you've got to be relatively, it's not about you, it's about the community. It's about making the world safer for the people in your community. So it's only going to attract a certain cadre of people from the outset.
Yeah,
Um, but if you're that kind of person that cares about people, that wants to try to make a difference. If you see something horrendous happen and you think, God, that's terrible, I wish I could do something, well, you can.
Yeah.
You know, this does open doors where you can actually make a difference. You know, you can be the first on the scene at something horrendous happening and change the outcome of it. So I'd actively encourage and promote it as a really good career choice. It's challenging, it's dangerous, it's all of those things, but no 2 days are ever the same.
Yeah. That's a big part of it too, isn't it? That you do not know what you're going to do every day you turn up as a police officer.
Yep.
Is there any one particular victim or situation that you've held on to? And sometimes it's, I get asked the question, what's the worst murder you've done, or one that's impacted on you? Is there one that sticks with you, a case that sticks with you?
Yeah, look, there's many. I mean, obviously the Bruce and Denise's loss of their son has always been there. But there's one that plays out in that documentary.
Yep.
And, I didn't realize that I had PTSD and all of us have PTSD. You've just got to know to recognize it.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with the kind of horrors that law enforcement deal with, you've got PTSD. You just don't know it.
Yeah.
But how I became aware that I had PTSD was the first time I watched that documentary.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah. And it's one case in that documentary that I can't watch. And it's really bizarre because I can talk about that case. I can present to detectives and investigators on that case, but I can't actually watch that case unfold. That one definitely sticks with me, and that's because it was just over such a long period of time that we were trying to find her, and seeing her content and trying to find the clue that would break the case in the content that he was producing, and so that plays out in that documentary. That's probably the one that really sticks with me, but it's also one that taught me a lot of lessons about how I'm going to, if I want to keep working in this crime type, the processes that I'm going to have to put in place to survive.
Yeah. It's interesting that you said that when you look at the documentary. I understand where you're coming from. There's a couple of cases that I sort of feel the same way. And when you've stepped away from the police, I'm probably 4 years out of the police now, and you look back at you've got time to clear your head and look back at the cases, and you realise the impact that had, and it doesn't have to be a negative impact. I'm just saying the impact that it's something that you carry with you, and you don't quite often realise that when you're in the police because you're so busy. And certainly in the work that you've done, you would have just been rolling on from one case to another, and always look what's in front of you and not have time to have a look back. So maybe that's part of it when you look at the documentary.
You're absolutely correct, Gary. You are moving on. In most cases, as you know, you've got multiple investigations running at any given time, reaching different fruition at different points. And it then just gets buried under the next ones. So it's only when you look back and you reflect, and that documentary makes me look back and reflect. It's then that you realize, gosh, how much stress you're actually under at that time. And and we really were, but I was very fortunate, going back to the rock thing, I was very fortunate to keep music as a big part of my life. Until COVID, I was still playing 20 or 30 times a year. And if there was a survival tip for cops in the job now, or people wanting to be, it's make sure you've got some balance. Because if you're dealing with trauma, which is what we do, every day we're dealing with trauma, not necessarily our own, somebody else's trauma every day. And you don't have something in your life to counteract that, a positive where you're actually seeing humanity having fun, like dancing. Example, I don't dance. I'm a terrible dancer, but playing music that made people dance, interacting with a bunch of musicians who were so far from being a cop, it helped me really compartmentalize and separate from my day job.
I get that so much, and people have. That's what the spiel that you just said then is basically what I tell people. That's how I got through as long as I did. I didn't hang around with cops I'd step away. And my thing was, martial arts, boxing, or meditation, or whatever, doing something completely different where you just switch off. No one cares that you're a police officer. They don't know about it, and it's something that yin yang, that balance to your life. You can go in and be intense in work, and then forget about it when you step away from it. So yeah, that's interesting that your music, and I could see that how that could be a great relief for the intensity of what your work is.
I told the band members many times that they were my survival kit. They made me laugh.
Yeah.
Backstage, because most of the gigs you're waiting for hours to get on stage, and the backstage antics, just wetting yourself laughing with some of the clowns I had to play with. But that regular exercise, just trying to keep a positive view of humanity is probably one of the biggest challenges for cops.
Yeah. And especially in the field that you've worked into, that takes away a lot of people. That's such a dark world.
Yeah, but if there's anybody who's thinking about, gosh, I couldn't do that work, I'd probably say to you, there's very few areas of policing that you can do where you actually can have such a huge impact on a person's life.
Yeah.
We were able to, our team continues to, but we were able to make an enormous difference to thousands of people's lives, rather than just, treadmill, another case.
Yeah.
I'd encourage people to consider it. It's like most parts of policing, it's not the actual investigations that causes you the stress. It's bureaucracy, it's the court process, it's court sentencing outcomes. It's all of those things that cause you to question.
100%.
Yep.
Well, John, I reckon you've earned the right to look back in a career that's made a difference. And I always think in policing, it's what's the legacy that you've left in your career. And you've certainly left or created a legacy and left a legacy that people are benefiting from. And I'm sure you've inspired people. And I full credit to you. Like, I know when I sit opposite a real detective and someone that's really put in there and made a difference, and you're one of those people. So I'd like to thank you for the work that you've done, and genuinely thank you for the work that you've done, and you've gone in there and made a difference.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks for having me on your show. But that thanks goes to a plethora of men and women around the country that are doing this every single day right now.
100%. Well done. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Gary.
I'm fortunate enough here on I Catch Killers to catch up with some great detectives, and Jon Rouse certainly sits up there with the best of them. The differences he's made in a real difficult area of policing, child exploitation and child abuse. And I like the fact that he's innovative in the way he approaches things. He tries to prevent crime and tries to make a difference. I really enjoyed chatting with him, and I think it's a sad thing that he's lost to the police. Hopefully he can keep his hand in somehow.